Recording in progress. 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. This is Jessie Fierro, one of the two facilitators for the Engagement Lab, and this is Andrés Moreno.
Woo, 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 woo. Welcome to the Engagement Lab cast.
This episode is going to be a bit longer because it's our summer summary episode. During the summer, we had 2 online sessions that focused on allowing the participants to connect.
There have been some big changes. We took a look at our first 2 sessions and we started to really have conversations between ourselves and then some conversation with JD and Adrian as well about what was working and what wasn't. As we keep looking at this being a year-long program and folks coming back for session after session, we really wanted to highlight and keep the ideas of emergent strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown present in our work. And we started to take a dive into looking at what wasn't working and how we as facilitators can transform and shift what we're doing to maybe offer different avenues that might work better for some folks. This led us to realizing that we can't do that without connecting with the participants. We offered everyone a one-on-one check-in / chat with Jesse, myself, and then them to come in and for them to just share with us how it's going for their process. You know, now that we're halfway through the year, what does this engagement lab look like? Is it what you were hoping to sign up for? Is there anything we can change? And we had a really good turnout. I mean, we got 30 out of 40 participants. So, I mean, that's a win on my end. It's a B+. So I'll take a B+.
We are very happy with Bs.
Right? We got some really great feedback from a lot of participants. Yeah. Do you remember off the top of your head, Jesse, some of the ones that stick out to you the most?
I think the feedback that we received that really ended up shaping the way we proceeded with the next 2 sessions were, one, they really wanted more opportunity to connect with each other, just as participants. We saw that what happened in Banff, and we spoke about this a little bit before, but the idea that because we transitioned to Zoom, we're really losing a lot of opportunities to have conversations that are more unfiltered and spontaneous. That's an opportunity that a lot of folks started to miss from our first engagement in Banff. And so part of the changes that we are implementing into these sessions is how can we create those opportunities of spontaneous conversations again? How do we foster community that is focused on getting to know each other and allowing that work to permeate, but that isn't necessarily the focus of why we're connecting? The second piece of feedback that really resonated with me was this idea that we had all of these amazing, lovely artists and community leaders, and we weren't giving them the opportunity to talk about the work that they're doing right now and talk about what's working and what hasn't been working for them. One of the things that inspired us from Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown is the idea that we must be responsive and adaptive. And hearing this feedback from our participants during the one-on-ones, we really needed to figure out how can we use the resources and the structures that we have created so far and adapt them to meet the needs of what our community members need right now. You'll see as we get deeper into the conversations with what our sessions look like. We really wanted to acknowledge that there is a plethora of knowledge in our community.
I do think that was a puzzle piece that we were missing in our original envisioning of the lab, is really asking ourselves, how can we highlight the knowledge that's already in the group and get them to have conversations with each other, where it's not always us leading the conversation, but we just give them the space to be able to connect with each other and be like, hey, I'm also doing this. This is what I learned. This is what worked and what didn't. And then them being able to compare notes, I guess, for lack of a better word. I think a big one for me was the desire to meet in person. There were so many people who brought up that they understand why we're doing it through Zoom, but that I think Zoom as a platform, while it's great and makes things accessible for folks, it also does take away a little bit of that connective tissue of being in person and being able to have those in between conversations, or, you know, the conversations that you have walking down the hallway together afterwards. I think those pieces are what's missing in the lab. And I think just missing in the format that we chose to do online, which we chose for accessibility, but are now realizing that I think there needs to be in-person connection. So that actually led us to creating some in-person gatherings that are going to be happening in September, one in Calgary and one in Edmonton. So I'm just really excited. They're like, as we plan them, we really just decided to just have a hangout, not have them come over and be like, we're going to have them fill out a survey or talk about this thing, but just instead being like, hey, here's food, here's a space, talk. And I'm really excited to see what happens with that. I think the one-on-one interviews were really, really great for us to also check with our participants, because I think some of them are really struggling to find time to be able to come join us. And especially the ones that are working within institutions and having to juggle the wild amount of work that is required to administer a theater company and still be able to make time for this kind of work, that not only is it the 3 hours every Monday night, every 2 months that we ask you to hang out with us, but it's also like the labor of before and after, right? Am I ready to walk into the space, or do I feel like certain things when I think about walking into the space because maybe I'm not caught up, or maybe I haven't had the time to do the reading, or all these things that do add up to how folks are engaging with our lab. It was a nice reminder that for us it's like, oh yeah, it's just like come hang out, but I don't know that everyone sees it that way, and just wondering how we can make this space inviting regardless of where you're at in your process. I think that's a big question that I don't have an answer to, but that's still kind of looming over.
Based on the feedback we received during the one-on-one interviews, we decided to organize session 3 with the value of conversation. And so we brought Amy and Everin back because we knew that they've already built a relationship with our participants. We also just love them.
We really do.
Shout out to Amy and Everin.
If I could have them at every session, I 100% would.
Oh, yeah, true. Based on the feedback we received and the desire to socially connect with others, we decided to begin this session on Gather Round. And so what Gather Round is this online platform. It's basically like friend speed dating. And so each of the rooms have 2-3 cards that have certain questions, mostly because I've done this before and I loved the turnout and the response was relatively positive. And so folks would get into these rooms, they would have these questions, they would have the option to opt in, opt out, they would connect. This would be around 7 minutes. We'd all come back into the main room and then they'd move on to the next room. This was really just a great opportunity for folks to connect with others one-on-one.
It was a really fun platform for us to play around with. Before the session, we tried out a round with Theater Alberta staff as well, mostly for us to be able to work out any technical difficulties that might pop up or anything like that. And it's honestly, Gather Round's not paying us to give them any advertising, but it was a really great platform because I think it did kind of instill that idea of fun as opposed to you are here to work. You know what I mean? It's like, we're just gonna spend the next half an hour chatting with one another. And it randomizes who you go into rooms with, which I thought was really great because then there's no rhyme or reason. You're just in a room with people and you're like, what's up? And just getting everybody to kind of cycle through that and talk to people that they might not necessarily go into a room with. So I thought that was really great. After the session, we moved on back to Zoom because I think we also realized that while Gather Round is fun, it's not great for working together.
I think also part of it is that Gather Round is great, but it is definitely taxing on the social battery because it's hard to talk about yourself.
So once we moved back to Zoom, after we were done playing Gather Round, we actually broke them up into groups together and we facilitated them. So Jesse, myself, Amy, Everin, JD, and Adrian all took a room. It was a small group of people in each circle, and we asked them 2 questions and we brought up some jam boards. So the questions were, what is community? And the next question was, how do we build/maintain community? So we facilitated conversations happening around those jam boards and we got them to work together. For those of you who have never used jam boards before, it's a function on Google Drive that you can create these kind of working jam boards. There's no better word for them. They're almost like whiteboards, and then you can put up sticky notes, you can draw, you can make arrows, and it allows you to kind of visually brainstorm together on things. And so they got to put up sticky notes with their own ideas, and then we facilitated conversations around them doing what we kind of did after session one, which is the redesign of questions. So taking all of the stuff and all of the suggestions they've put on the board and moving them around to create clusters of similar ideas, to narrow down all of the beautiful ideas we had into some concrete and more streamlined answers. And I thought that that was really beautiful. Things that I remember seeing were like food. Food was a really big one. Just the idea of showing up and what that actually is. I remember my group specifically had a conversation about what showing up looked like and the barriers that that also causes. You know, the words of show up also have this connotation of you better be ready. You better show up ready to work. Whereas sometimes just the act of being present is all you need for the community to start realizing that you are a part of the community. Yeah, I thought it was a really fun part of the session to just get folks to talk about what that means. As we're working together in this lab and we talk about how it's about community capacity and building community with each other, I don't think up to this point we've actually had the conversation as to what that looks like for some folks. And we also made one Jamboard available for folks who couldn't show up to the meeting so that they could still pop in their ideas later on. All of this conversation led to the end of our session, which was creating the personal experiments.
The solo experiments that we offered participants to engage with were these mini experiments that were intended to be achievable, sustainable, practical, and joyful. They were solo experiments that folks could create on their own and bring into their communities and really put into practice what it meant to build community. But one of the most important things that I could see folks struggling with is how do we engage with this work that it isn't homework, that this is an obligation, that we're doing this because we're curious and because we care about building community and we care about relationships.
So we had folks who were like, I'm going to go see fringe shows. And we had folks who were like, I'm going to have coffee with somebody once a month and have conversations about that. And I think that that's really exciting. And then we took 2 months off. Jesse and I took some time to also breathe and rebalance ourselves.
So that brings us to session 4. And session 4 for us was sort of a check-in for our participants. So we connected with them around how their solo experiment went for them, what was difficult for them to do, how that felt emotionally. It was important for us that it wasn't, did you do your homework? What is your homework? For us, it was, how did this affect you? What impact did this create for you? And did you see an impact in your community? Based on what those solo experiments were and the themes of the solo experiments, we came up with a few questions that could shape the conversations we had in this session. We created 4 breakout rooms on the questions of how do we expand our artistic communities / networks beyond that of traditional means? How can we expand the ways that we collaborate and deepen our relationships, both between artists and between organizations? How do we deepen our connections through play, movement, and embodiment, and build trust to share our stories in performance form? And how do we cultivate sustainable, dignified livelihoods as we employ the artists in a gig economy? Folks had the opportunity to go into the breakout room with the question that most resonated with them. And in the same sense of in-person flow, folks could hop between rooms if they felt like they entered a space that they don't feel like they can contribute for whatever reason. They can come back into the main room and chill out, or they can go on to the next question.
I think what I really enjoyed about this specific session too was having everyone talk about their experiments and whether or not it worked or not. But then also having all these questions and thoughts that came out of just the attempt of doing something, of choosing something small that you might not have actually gotten to. And there was no judgment around that. It made folks actually think about, okay, I said something that I thought I had capacity for, and it turns out I didn't. Does that highlight that maybe I am working too hard or that I'm not making space for the things that actually matter in my life because I'm too focused on making sure that I get deadlines and grants and things done?
These questions came out of what's happening right now in community. What are the things that we're struggling with right now? And to build on this idea that we're not siloing this information anymore. The intention is that we're all in this together. We may have different priorities, but that's fantastic. We can't all be working on the same thing. I mean, we can, but inevitably, people will branch off. Creating these conversations that bring in different aspects of the work that we're doing so that we can share methods and tools and tactics, I felt was sort of our means of answering the need of we just want to get to know each other.
I love what you just said there. I just want to highlight it. We just want to get to know each other. I think that's the toughest thing. As the administrators, that's something I keep thinking about because we created this program thinking our community wants resources, our community wants tools, our community wants to hear from the other communities as to what's happening, how we can adapt, how we can take things that are happening across the nation and experiment with them here in Alberta. And the more and more we get along in this process, the more that I think people just want to know each other again. We're just, I won't say getting out of a pandemic because we're living in it, baby.
Oh no.
but people are coming out of a real hibernation period of social interaction. And I think sometimes the higher learning conversations are getting in the way of how we can just get to know each other. And I'm hoping that our in-person meetings that are going to be happening in September, I'm really holding on to the hope that those create that idea that we can just get together to hang out and share some food and have conversations and just check in with each other. But I'm also very keen not to place my own biases and my own desired outcomes into anything we do moving forward. I think something I'd like to touch on next, I think, is just how our experience has been. We've been talking a lot about what we're offering our participants. If we're going to make a podcast for people to listen to these conversations, we also should talk about what administering, or like we said in our original episodes, what starting a movement is like.
I think one of the hardest things for me as a facilitator is staying true to the original intentions of why we brought the engagement lab into existence. Because in the process of trying to be adaptive and responsive and in connection to what's going on, it's easy to be like, oh, this is your need. Well, I know what I can do to meet that need. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that's going to stay to the core values of this work. I'm always constantly navigating how to remain responsive and adaptive, but also remembering that this engagement lab is about creating opportunities to engage with each other, fail gracefully, fail together, and learn together. It's hard because we can't meet the needs of everyone in the group. It's hard because sometimes we don't know what the needs are because some of the folks who we've lost along the way aren't finding a channel of communication to reach back to us. Mm-hmm. It's a lot to juggle.
I echo and agree with a lot of what you've said, right? I think it's hard because without actually knowing, if we're creating barriers for folks to be able to come and enjoy the engagement lab, we're kind of left to guess how we can keep people excited. The one-on-one interviews gave us a great opportunity to connect with some folks and have those conversations, and we're staying responsive based on that feedback. But as much as this is about creating an equitable ecology for theater here in Alberta, I think it's also about making theater a space that feels like everyone is welcome to be who they are, and that there isn't this weird hierarchy between the people who are in power in institutions and the artists who do their own projects and who try to produce them. I echo what you're saying, and I think a big other part of this mystery is granting bodies, is money. We have received money to do one thing, and as much as we were like, well, what if we just cancel the rest of the sessions and do another Banff hangout? That's not money we have, and that's not money we can repurpose in that way. I think the question of how do we do what we want to do, but also remain true and honest to our original intentions and make sure that we're keeping our money holders, the people who gave us money to do this, happy and content with what we're doing because they gave us money to do a specific thing, is really hard. I touched on this in earlier episodes, but for myself, I've never run anything of this scale or size before. And I think the administrative part of it has gotten really hard because I'm trying to keep 40 people content and trying to get 40 people to still be excited about this project that they signed up for, what, 9, 10 months ago? Something like that. So I keep going back to this thing of like, God, I wish I had had 6 months to have conversations myself, like you and me, with other people who have done this, who could be like, you know what? What you've dreamed up is great. This is how I would probably shift it a little bit. Just to be able to have that kind of knowledge of like, okay, going in, I know that this is something we're gonna like maybe come up against from our participants, and how can we mitigate that from day one? There's a lot of beauty that I'm experiencing from being able to be a part of something like this and from being able to be responsive to community, at least for myself. But as we keep moving forward, there's also a small part of me that's burning out because we're trying so many different things. We've got a book club, we've got drop-ins, we've got the sessions, we're doing in-person sessions now, we've got the podcast, we've got all these things that we're trying to do to engage our community. And the more that we do this and it doesn't feel like it's working, the more exhausted I'm starting to feel. Sorry, I feel like I'm bringing us down.
No, don't apologize. Never apologize. It's true. I mean, all that you're describing is true. Something that I really treasure from Adrienne Mary Brown is this idea that in order to quote unquote create a movement, it's to ensure that the people you're engaging with feel that they have their own agency and that they have their own unique, important position in this movement. And for me, that's a beautiful concept and incredibly difficult when channels of communication between facilitators and participants aren't being utilized to the best that it could be. It's hard. I've facilitated before, but this is by far the biggest project that I've taken on. And I'm grateful for this opportunity, but I can't help but to think that we really needed more time. We needed more time to connect with community outside of the context of the lab already. And it's not like we were going in without any idea of who these folks were. We had mentioned earlier, this started with All In. This started with the 3550. But I think one of the things that we didn't realize is that just because we know these people within the context of the 3550 and All In doesn't mean that the way they're going to engage with us will be the same. And we're not asking them to engage in the same way as they have for these other programs.
But I also think there's something that you brought up that made me realize something. There's also the part that some of these folks are new to our community. We have some people who are leaders within our community who are very new to our community. If we had met Amy and Everett at the beginning, the first question I would have asked them is, how can we build trust with each other to be able to be honest in these spaces and be like, you know what? I am burnt out. I'm exhausted. I don't know that I can do this. And have those conversations without worrying that the community is going to talk about you behind your back. Because I think that's something that we are hearing a little bit of here and there, is that some folks are scared to actually have conversations in the space because they're new and they don't know the community. How do we support those people and bring them into what's already established, but also give them the agency to be able to bring new ideas or change things? I think overall, I wish we had more time. I wish we had consulted a little more. But on the opposite end, I'm also going to take 2 seconds to say, I think we're doing really great at staying responsive, which was something that was brought up during our BAMF conversations.
We're doing it. We're doing the thing.
Oh, yeah. And just a final shout out to the people who we do have as mentors, because we've mentioned JD and Adrian, who have been great. We also now have Amy and Everin, who we've touched base with a couple times from when they came into our session. And they've been really great at just having conversations with us and making space for us. And then we also have support from the Theatre Alberta staff. Most specifically, Carrie Mitchell has made space for us to talk about these things because she understands that we're administrating something for a first time and that comes with hurdles. We do have supports on our end that have been really great and that don't negate the points we're bringing up, but that it is important for me to make sure that we do lift up those who have been helping us. And we keep going.
And we keep going.
If there's anything I love about having you and my team, Jesse, is that we keep going together. We aren't giving up on this lab. At least we're trying different things. And we've got a good idea for what we're going to do in our next session. I think what we're doing in our next session is kind of marrying our original impetus with the feedback and the last 2 sessions in a really cool way.
I agree. I mean, Still early days, despite being halfway through the program. Still a lot of opportunity here. I think we have a hard time in between the sessions and the leading in, and I think this can be said for our participants as well. In between the sessions, it's hard to be motivated. But when you get there, it's an entirely different game. We can share energy. When we're in the space, it's a reminder that we're doing this together. And we have our limitations. These sessions are only 3 hours every 2 months. And we have our optional drop-ins and our optional book club. And outside of that, it's really up to us to continue being in relationship and not expecting everything to happen within our limited 3 hours.
I hope this is helpful to some of you. I do think it's worthwhile to have these conversations and not just keep them in a bubble with you and I. And like you said, we keep going. And I think that's what I'm going to hold on to is we keep trying different things and we'll end up somewhere.
Absolutely. It may not be where we expect, but we absolutely have made a change.
Now, to end with joy, I'm going to ask you a question, okay, Jesse? Because you like to be interrogated by me, apparently. Apparently. So to end with joy, let's go back to our third session that we had in the summer where we had the jam boards and we asked the question, what is community? Do you remember one of the offerings made by the participants that sticks out to you?
I don't remember who offered this, but this Post-it note entirely encapsulates my intentions for the engagement lab. Community is the community you choose and who chooses you. And that's huge. I think this is a conversation that happens often in community. This idea that in Alberta, we see that particularly BIPOC artists are leaving for whatever reason that they're leaving. How do we merge these intentions of a community you choose and you want to be a part of, but doesn't necessarily see you versus a community that sees you, but you no longer have the capacity to engage with that community because for however long, for whatever reason, they haven't met you where you needed them to meet you. A community you choose and who chooses you. That's huge. That's everything to me. How about you?
I'm stuck between a couple, but I think what I really like is, and again, I also don't remember who brought this up, but part of the jam boards is that the offerings don't have names attached to them, so they can be a bit anonymous. But the one that sticks out to me is somebody put in, it was something along the lines of coming together and coming apart and coming together again. Something along those lines. And it was the idea that community is something you can always come back to and that it's okay to leave when you're busy, but that will be there waiting for you when you're ready to come back to it. And I think that was part of why we also chose to have this as a year-long session with time in between the sessions. We've seen a lot of these retreats or these initiatives do like a week workshop and then you leave and there's no follow-up, there's no reconnecting. And I think that that's something that we're at least doing with the engagement lab. I don't remember how we set it up, but there is a Monday every 2 months where you can go into a Zoom room and have a community of folks who are all working towards the same thing. So I think that when somebody brought that up in the Post-it notes, I was like, look at that. So yeah, thank you for that. Is there any last thoughts you have before we sign off today?
Just take care of yourself, y'all. It's tough out there. We're there with you. We get it. We maybe don't understand, but we feel you.
Yeah, I think make sure that as much as you can, value balance. I think that that's a key that I'm learning. But also to whoever's listening, thank you for sticking around because it's nice to have these conversations. And at the end of the day, I hope they're helpful to anyone out there. You know, I hope that there's something to glean from these conversations as you listen. And we're just super thankful to always have engagement in whatever way we can get it. So thank you all and always end with love. Bye. The Engagement Lab podcast is possible with the initial support from 3 local foundations to transition our all-in program to the 3550 initiative and the Engagement Lab. The foundations were the Edmonton Community Foundation, Calgary Foundation, and the Rozsa Foundation.
We're thrilled to announce that the Engagement Lab is supported by both Alberta Culture's Community Initiatives Program and the Canada Council for the Arts. Feed Alberta is grateful to our operating funders, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Edmonton Arts Council, and Calgary Arts Development. Thank you so much for tuning in.
And we'll see you next time at the Engagement Lab podcast.